Budget Outlaws. My name is Andrew, and today we're going to do a quick overview on the engine build, intercooler, and fuel injection on the orange Audi turbo-powered Porsche 914. I have detailed how-to videos on these subjects that you should check out if you want to follow along at home. The link to these will be in the description. First off, the motor is a junkyard Audi 1.8 turbo 058 AEB. That means it has a large port head and intake, and is a solid choice to build for a big turbo. I tore down the motor and sent it to a machine shop to have the block and head decked or milled flat, and to have the cylinders honed. They also polished the crank and installed my pistons for me on my scat rods. I decided since I was going to build the motor rev, I wanted them to balance the rotating assembly as well, an extra cost but well worth it. After getting back all my pretty and clean parts, I disassembled the head, lapped the stock stainless steel intake valves and my new SuperTech nitrite coated stainless exhaust valves, disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled the lifters, and put everything back together on with my new SuperTech high strength valve springs. While I had the valves out, I cleaned the castings on the exhaust side ports because why not? Now, one thing was in the sealed factory bag for the valve springs, I had a mismatched spring that was obviously wrong. I called up SuperTech, and for $13, they sent me the right spring. I used 034 Motorsports dry-coated race bearings for the rod and the crank bearings, since I was planning on tracking the car and figured the extra $150–200 was worth the protection. I started to assemble the short block, and the clearances looked really good, so no issues proceeding to the finished assembly. I used goatees, or however you pronounce it, rings, that I got directly from Germany, and then I gapped them to .019 on the top and .020 on the bottom, or the middle ring. The bottom ring is the oil ring, and I just left it as is. I finished the assembly of the block, painted a bunch of things, and started to work on the accessories onto the block. I decided to go with a manual timing belt tensioner, and the one that was available was from IE. Now, they used a standard tensioner from, I don't remember which particular car, and it failed on me when installing it. So I welded up the original tensioner with a solid piece, and it worked just fine. After rotating the engine assembly, I found that the rod was hitting the intermediate shaft, and so I needed to clearance it. I cut it down to roughly about 1/4 inch from the original, and also had them balance it. It was extremely far off, and I was amazed that it came from the factory with this much out of balance. I finalized the assembly of the engine and put the head and intake and fuel injectors and fuel rail, and finally all the rest of the parts together. And that was the finish of my engine assembly. For fueling, I ran a Bosch 044 fuel pump inside of a 034 Motorsports surge tank, ran AN10 PTFE lines to my factory fuel rail with an adapter, and ran 1300cc fuel injectors. Overall, the system should handle 500 to 600 horsepower. Now, for the intercooler, I needed to run an air-to-water intercooler since I didn't have space for airflow for an air-to-air. I used an E-base 700 horsepower core. I placed it right behind the driver's seat. I used the silicone piping to the core. The main portion of the piping is about 3 inches. And I used a forged diverter valve, but it left it to open recirculate. That way it's essentially a blow-off valve. I used a small motorcycle radiator for the actual cooling element of the water, and then did everything as a self-purging system. That way I wouldn't have to worry about air in the lines. Made everything out of stainless steel for the actual connection pieces. You notice I have red and blue on the intercooler The red is hot, the blue is cold. I ran a Bosch pump from a 944 turbo, the actual turbo recirculating pump. That way I knew that it would do the job. And that is it.